In the 5th century Eastern Roman Empire, there was a young boy, a teenager, a shepherd boy named Simeon. The story goes that after hearing about the Jesus of the Gospels, that is, after hearing that one must lose his life on earth to gain it in heaven, that, contrary to the rule of the world, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are the pure in spirit. After hearing this, Simeon was so moved that he quickly joined a monastery and devoted his life to Christ. But this was no normal teenage boy, nor was he to be a normal monk. So great was Simeon's fervor to deny this life and gain eternity that he developed ascetic practices so extreme that they shocked the other monks. He would not eat for weeks. He would not sit for weeks. He would wrap his body in ropes until his skin festered. He even lived in a dried cistern for a while so as to live out his own burial. He would endure anything so as to assure himself that he cared not about this world, that his heart and mind were on God and God alone. After a few years, the monks finally sat him down and explained that monastic life, a communal life, was not for him. It is solitude you seek, they told him. So Simeon left. He found a cave outside town. It was small, but it would do. He lived there for a while. He continued his practices, deepened his devotion, deepened his prayer, deepened his commitment to despise this life. But soon enough word had spread about this holy man, this wild man with miraculous capacities who lived in a cave, and visitors began to overwhelm Simeon. He was kind, he was gracious, but it became clear that he must move once again, must once again seek higher ground, away from the world, closer, as it were, to God. Soon he found a 9-foot pillar amongst some ruins in the Syrian mountains. It was sturdy enough, he thought. So he constructed a platform on top of the pillar, climbed on, and from that point on, Simeon would come down from one pillar only long enough to construct a higher one, and then a higher one, and then a higher one, until finally he sat himself atop a 50-foot pillar and remained there until his death 37 years later. 37 years, exposed to the blistering sun, exposed to the cold rain, most of the time standing, most of the time praying, most of the time fasting. 37 years, a man on a pillar. In the 6th century, after Simeon had been recognized as Saint Simeon for such a remarkably devout life, a plaque was made as a devotion. It displays Simeon atop his pillar, his eyes focus on Scripture, his mind on God and God alone. A serpent coils itself around the structure, has climbed far enough to sink its fangs into Simeon, and one imagines it would, if only the devout ascetic would blink. But we know he won't. The serpent is evil, of course. Evil from below the pillar. The evil of the world from which Simeon has escaped by total renunciation. Listen to this. In Volume 2 of Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation, he praises the most austere ascetics from the East for, quote, aspiring to real holiness, the throwing away of all property, the forsaking of every dwelling place and of all kinsfolk, for deep unbroken solitude spent in silent contemplation with voluntary penance and terrible slow self-torture, for the complete mortification of the will, ultimately going as far as voluntary death by starvation, or facing crocodiles, or jumping over the consecrated precipice of the Himalaya, or being buried alive, or flinging oneself under the wheels of the huge car that drives around with the images of the gods and the singing and the shouting and the dancing of bayadeers. That which has remained in practice for so long, says Schopenhauer, in a nation embracing so many millions, while it imposes the heaviest sacrifices, cannot be an arbitrarily invented freak, but must have its foundation in the very nature of mankind. Perhaps these figures seem too foreign, too extreme, too far from us here in the West. Well then, what about the man who has shaped the Western world more than any other? consider Jesus of Nazareth. Is he the man of the so-called health, wealth, and prosperity gospel so popular in America's Protestant megachurches? The one according to which devotion to God will enrich your earthly existence, give you straight white teeth. The one who will ensure your crops grow to abundance, that your bank account soars, that tragedy and hardship will pass you over. Far from it. Jesus was a radical. He was a man of harsh truths. The Jesus of the Gospels called his disciples to despise this life. Over and over and over again does he disparage our typical concerns for food, for money, for status, for success, even for family and country. After all, what are such earthly concerns in comparison with eternity? How important are they? He always reminded us, next to one's eternal soul. Think of Matthew 8, where a would-be disciple asked Jesus if he can bury his father before departing to spread the gospel. What does Jesus say? With a straight face, he said, "Let the dead bury their dead." And what did he say about the cost of discipleship? What does he say in Luke 14? "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even hate their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple." And again in John 12, "Anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life." Finally, in Matthew 6, he tells us that in the end we must choose our own master. Is it this world or the next? We cannot have both, he says. "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other." If you have to choose between this life and the next, says Jesus, despise this life, detach from it, and seek heaven. Well then, did Saint Simeon get it right? Here's my question about Schopenhauer, about Simeon, about Jesus and the ascetics of the East. What are we to make of these men, of these practices? They renounce the world. It is not just Lamborghinis and supermodels and cocaine that they reject. They renounce family. They renounce country. They renounce all that is not eternal, which is to say everything on earth. What is that? Is that wise? Do their practices reflect some profound truth? Or is it something else? Are they sick? Have they been misled? Or perhaps they're right. Perhaps we must wash ourselves clean of all these ashes, all of this dust. The question isn't new. It was central to Nietzsche's work. In every age, he writes in Twilight of the Idols, about life the wisest men of all ages have come to the same conclusion. It is no good. Always and everywhere one has heard the same sound from their mouths, a sound full of doubt, full of melancholy, full of weariness of life, full of resistance to life. What does that mean? What does that prove? What does that demonstrate? At one time, one would have said, at least something must be true here. The consensus of the sages must show us the truth. At least something must be sick here, we retort. So Nietzsche thinks these men are sick. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But they have arguments for their positions, and one ought to consider those first. That's what I'd like to do in this mini-series on the life-denying perspective. The perspective according to which the potential fruits of life are unworthy of pursuit, and salvation requires renouncing them totally. And by the potential fruits of life, I mean many of the characteristics that most of us would say constitute a good life. Our health, success in our endeavors, intimate love, family, and so on. Is that true? Should we climb the pillar? That's our question. Welcome to Gods Will Be Gods. I have mentioned Christianity, Schopenhauer, Buddhism, and Hinduism as examples of life-denying worldviews. I should say up front that, well, it's an open question whether that label is apt with respect to all of these groups. In this episode, I'm going to focus primarily on the ones about which, to my mind anyway, there is no question as to whether they deny life. Schopenhauer and the more extreme, or the most extreme, ascetics of the East. In this latter category, I include Jainism, an ancient Indian religious group that still has followers today, notorious perhaps for starving themselves to death, something for which Schopenhauer was quite proud of them, and some extreme sects of the Vedic Hindu tradition. I should also say that these latter groups from the East are the very ones that the Buddha himself rejected as too extreme on his way to discovering the middle path. We'll consider whether Buddhism itself is a life-denying philosophy in another episode, but it's worth saying here, perhaps, that, to my mind anyway, Buddhism is both more nuanced, certainly a lot more optimistic than Schopenhauer, even if, in the end, the Buddhist does see life as something from which we ought to escape. In any case, though, the middle path does wisely, in my opinion, avoid the extremes of Schopenhauer and the others from the ancient East, so that's why I'm not including it here. I should also say that I'm not going to talk about Christianity in this episode, despite the intro. Sorry if I got people riled up and prepared to listen to that. This is a mini-series. We likely won't see Christianity again until the 5th or the 6th episode. And the reason is that Christianity must be treated on its own. It's exceptional within the group of what I've called life-denying perspectives, whereas Schopenhauer and the most extreme views of the East criticize earthly pursuits on their own terms, Jesus typically criticizes these pursuits comparatively, and that's an important distinction. So, for example, Schopenhauer argues that earthly ends, so success, material possessions, love, and so on, they never live up to the hype of anticipation, he says. The pleasures they bring, they never last long, and etc. Jesus may well agree with all that, but that's not how he talks in the Gospels. He compares heavenly or eternal things, such as God or eternal life or the soul, with worldly and impermanent things. And it's on that comparative basis that he rejects the latter. At least that's the way he talks. We saw that earlier, right? Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And perhaps that's worth lingering on for a moment. Jesus says that compared to eternal life in heaven, life on earth is insignificant, worthy of renunciation. Well, whether or not that's easy to accomplish, it's difficult to argue with. On the assumption of eternal life in heaven, where there is no sickness, no death, no worry, where lions lie with the lambs and so on, life in this world, with all of its troubles, it seems, well, nasty, brutish, and short, to borrow a phrase from Hobbes. It's comparatively insignificant. And yes, if you can potentially forfeit an eternal, perfect life by giving yourself over to this earthly one, then it's rather clear that you should do whatever you need to do to avoid that. Sit on a pillar, if that's what it takes. Why risk eternity for such brief and comparatively paltry pleasures as earth provides? The point is that Jesus' form of life denial is inextricably wound up with his claims about the Father, about the soul, about the afterlife, metaphysical claims that I'm not going to take up today. They would distract us from our main focus, which is the resolute denial of life, of earthly life, on its own terms that one finds in Schopenhauer and the more extreme views of the East. I could also add, by the way, that Christianity does not, unlike those groups, explicitly call for the total extirpation of desire, but we'll save that discussion. So consider these ascetics. Why do they live this way? If these figures seem odd, otherworldly, perhaps, it's important to understand that they are not mad. These are not just wild men isolating themselves, mortifying themselves for no reason. Whatever we come to think of these so-called holy people, they do have their reasons. So consider first a quote from the Ācārāṅga Sūtra, wherein prescriptions are spelled out for the Jainist monk. Here it is. He should not long for life, nor wish for death. He should not give way to sorrow nor joy. He should bear pain and disease, cold and heat, without any attachment. He should wander about, homeless, without a fixed abode, and take food only once a day, not desiring delicious food. He should not clean his body nor adorn it. He should wear coarse garments and sleep on the bare ground. He should meditate day and night, restraining his mind, speech, and body, and practice the severest penance. So the monk is to cultivate a state in which he is unmoved by the external world, unmoved by emotion, by the senses, unmoved by a home or a lack of one, unmoved by food or the lack thereof. He is not to have desires for tasty food or handsome clothes. He's supposed to be unmoved by a lack of comfort. He is to focus everything on meditation, practicing, as it says, the severest penance. Why? Why the detachment from emotions, affects, and desires that, to most everyone, are not only normal, but natural? We'll look shortly at one of the main arguments underpinning these prescriptions, but for now I want to understand just the general rationale. So consider an alcoholic. Let's say that the alcoholic comes to see his drinking as a problem, as the cause of his suffering. Well, what's the reasonable thing for him to do? He should stop drinking, of course. He should make every effort to distance himself from the temptation to drink. Stay away from the bars, keep the bottles out of the home, remove himself from relationships in which drinking is a primary feature, and so on. In short, he ought to do everything he can to remove alcohol from his life. It is, after all, what ails him. Well, that general rationale is the same for these ascetics. But the Schopenhauerian or the Eastern ascetic or the extreme Eastern ascetic sees not just one particular desire as his ailment, but desire itself, all of it, striving for things, wanting things, craving for things, he thinks, is his problem. That might sound ridiculous to some of you, because desire is obviously natural to us. But that's exactly why these extreme forms of asceticism are so radical. That's what makes them radical. They see our natural state, which is full of manifold desires, as problematic, as the cause of our suffering. We'll look at exactly why these ascetics believe this in a moment, but for now, just think. If you did believe that desire was the cause of your suffering, what would you do? Well, just like the alcoholic who seeks to cure himself by removing alcohol from his life, so too would the ascetics, or do the ascetics, seek to extirpate desire totally by starving the will, by starving desire, by treating it as a weed to be removed. Block the sunlight, block the nourishment, and watch it wither and die. That is the hope. As for what that looks like, well, we just saw it in the passage above, but also consider this, what is, I think, one of the best descriptions of the mental state of an extreme ascetic. It's from Herman Hesse's Siddhartha, a fictionalized version of the life of the Buddha, in which Siddhartha describes his mental state at the height of his ascetic phase. And I should add here that this is Siddhartha in his ascetic phase, right? And Siddhartha in this novel, Siddhartha, again, it's the life of the Buddha, and in this novel, and in actual life, the Buddha goes on to reject the ascetic phase as too extreme. But here he is in that phase. Here's the passage. Siddhartha gave his garments to a poor Brahmin in the street. He wore nothing more than a loincloth and the earth-colored unsewn cloak. He ate once a day, and never something cooked. He fasted for 15 days. He fasted for 28 days. The flesh waned from his thighs and cheeks. Feverish dreams flickered from his enlarged eyes. Long nails grew slowly on his parched fingers, and a dry, shaggy beard grew on his chin. His glance turned to ice when he encountered women. His mouth twitched with contempt when he walked through a city of nicely dressed people. He saw merchants trading, princes hunting, mourners wailing for their dead, whores offering themselves, physicians trying to help the sick, priests determining the most suitable day for seating, lovers loving, mothers nursing their children, and all of this was not worthy of one look from his eye. It all lied. It all stank. It all stank of lies. It all pretended to be meaningful and joyful and beautiful, and it was all just concealed putrefaction. If the term life denial seems like a pejorative, a critical term meant to disparage these extreme ascetics, I think we can now see that it's not necessarily a label they would reject. The whole point, as I said earlier, of extreme asceticism actually is to deny, to repudiate, to willfully kill the forces at work in the natural state of the human being. These desires we have for food, for comfort, for success, even for love, these are, thanks to life denier, the source of our suffering. And if we can starve the will within ourselves to death, we might thereby escape the cycle of suffering so common to humanity. I should say inherent to humanity. When we talk about life denial and extreme asceticism, that is what we are talking about. Well, as I said, they have their reasons. It's important to say up front here that I'm not going to entertain every single argument for life denial put forth by every one of its proponents in this one episode, obviously. I want to treat these arguments as well as I can, and that takes time. This mini-series on life denial will take at least 4 or 5, maybe 6 episodes, I think. In this one, I want to consider an idea you've probably heard before, namely that life is suffering. And this claim is, I think, the crux of the Schopenhauerian and the Eastern arguments for why life denial is the highest form of life, why it is the correct path and the one to salvation. And before I begin, it's worth saying that the best way to see for yourself whether the following summary of the arguments is accurate is just to read the primary text yourself. So read Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation. If not the whole thing in Volume 1, at least read Book 4. And if you fall in love with Schopenhauer, go for it. Read Volume 2. On its face, the claim that life is suffering might strike us as absurd. The proper response seems to be, well, no. Of course there's joy. Have you not seen a mother holding her newborn child? Have you not seen young lovers frolic through a field on a sunny day? Have you not seen a champion athlete celebrate her victory? Have you no ear for a beautiful melody, no eyes for sun and sea, no tongue for sweet wine? Of course there is joy. But the claim is a little more nuanced than the bald statements suggest. Neither Schopenhauer nor the Eastern ascetics mean that life is just always and everywhere physical and emotional pain. The idea is a bit deeper than that. No one is denying that there is such thing as joy. The insight of the life deniers, and it is an insight, I think, is that the joys in life are rarer than we like to admit. They're short-lived, and in any case, however long they last, they occur within a scenario that ends in death. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. To put that last part a bit differently, everything that makes up a moment of joy, so think of the newborn child. Well, the child born, the mother to whom it is born, the doctor that delivers it, the home the mother brings it to, and so on. All of these things, everything that makes up that moment of joy will eventually wither and die. So again, the point is that whatever joy there is in life, it is, as it were, spoiled by its impermanence. The joy is enveloped in suffering. Or you might say that joy takes place on a stage of what is undeniably a tragic play. After all, we know how it ends, with the decay and death of everything and everyone on stage. That's the general picture, but let's go a bit deeper. Another important insight, and to my mind the most important insight from Schopenhauer and the Eastern tradition generally, is that we are by nature willing beings. In other words, we are born wanting things, and it never stops. As Schopenhauer puts it somewhere in the bowels of The World as Will and Representation, we are concrete willing through and through. Willing is our nature. From the second we are born, the desires start. We want our mother, we want comfort, we want food, and so on. We grow older, but the cycle remains. We want more things, we want different things, but the want is still there. We want to feel certain ways, we want to achieve certain things. Always we are striving towards some end or other. But no matter what it is that we are after, once we get it, it's not as if that from that point on we're all good. Nope. The joy only lasts a short time before yet another desire comes to the fore, and we're back off to the races. This is why, by the way, meditation is so difficult, why it takes so much practice, sitting there undistracted by thought or desire. It's entirely unnatural to us. So this cycle of striving goes on and on and on, never ceasing because, and here is a crucial point, because nothing on this earth can satisfy us completely. We are never fully content. We are never fully satisfied. The new car begins to look old again. The new lover, it turns out, is only human, and no matter how much we love them, there will be problems in the relationship, fights, disagreements, betrayals, and so on. Our children grow and they need us less and want less of us. The house decays, our body decays, and every one of these disappointments brings with it a new desire for relief. The general cycle plays out millions of times throughout our life until finally we die. So as it turns out, whatever happiness we did achieve in life, it could never have lasted forever. Not in this world. Not in this world in which nothing is permanent. For the life deniers, that is life as a willing creature in an impermanent world. And that is the sense in which life is suffering. Life is suffering because this impermanent world offers no final satisfaction for our perpetual willing. Better, then, to extinguish desire, to extirpate it, to renounce the world, escape the cycle, and finally attain peace through the back door. Here is Schopenhauer, cheery as always. The life of man oscillates like a pendulum to and fro between boredom and suffering. In fact, when we lack something, we suffer from want. But when we have it, we are not content but are bored. Then the cycle begins anew. Elsewhere, he puts it this way: life is a constant dying, and why suffering is its essential nature. For the will's striving is perpetually frustrated by the transitoriness of its objects, and death is nearly the final confirmation of this futility. I laugh because, I'll put it this way. Somewhere in the same book, The World is Will and Representation, Schopenhauer says that life is a tragic comedy. Well, you kind of have to look at his books the same way. If you're not laughing a bit as you're reading it, then there's no hope you're going to make it through. Do you see it now, though? If that description of life strikes you as true, then it's worth asking, why not climb the pillar? Why not extinguish life? Rid yourself of this putrid sore of striving and craving with which we are so plagued. Perhaps, then, these men are wise. Perhaps they are above the fray, see life for what it is, and wisely, as I said, quietly exit through the back door. Okay. So here's the critique, or at least the beginning of it anyway. Let me ask you this. Are you convinced? Are you ready to climb the pillar? If I had to guess, probably most of you aren't. And it's worth asking yourself why. Most people don't renounce life, extinguish desire, become a monk. That's not much of an argument, of course. We'll get to that. But I do think this common reaction is telling towards an argument. Some of us may even agree that life can generally be described as a tragedy. And yet we don't rush off to renounce life. Why? Is it just that we don't think we have the willpower, that we don't think we can do it? Is it that we are delusional about our prospects for a good life? We're all dumb enough to think that we can have a worthwhile life? I don't think so. I think that even those of us who accept that life has a tragic character make something along the lines of the following assessment. We say, you know what? Sure, life may be tragic, but in the end, there's also joy and beauty and mystery and the whole mess of it, and in any case, it's not so bad as to warrant total escape. Now, again, that's not much of an argument, but I do think it points to one. Schopenhauer offers a description of life that many of us, including myself, will accept as true. We are willing beings. Life is a series of cycles of willing or striving, brief moments of satisfaction, followed by more striving and so on until an inevitable death. That's true, or at least that part of it's true. But that's only a description, a set of facts. And Schopenhauer and the Eastern traditions, or the more extreme ones, take those facts to warrant rather extreme universal normative judgments, or value judgments. And I'm not sure that they have the philosophical grounds for that. For example, They say that our natural state is filled with striving. True. But they also say that all striving is suffering, that suffering is always bad, and so suffering is so overwhelming in life that it is best to escape it. Is that necessarily true? Must we agree that all striving is a form of suffering? Must we agree that all suffering is bad? Must we agree that our inability to find final satisfaction in this world spoils life? That final satisfaction is the only thing that could make life worthwhile? Again, I'm not so sure. There's a book from the early 20th century titled Schopenhauer and Nietzsche by George Simmel. And Simmel says, and I'm paraphrasing here, something along the lines that Schopenhauer, and one could add the Eastern ascetics, seem to confuse the logic of striving with the psychology of it. And I think that's exactly right. Sure, life is filled with striving for things, and insofar as we are striving for something, we don't have it. We are in that sense deprived of it. We don't have what we want, and that seems bad. That's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the experience of striving is thoroughly negative, or even that it is overwhelmingly negative. Striving isn't always suffering, or anyway, not always suffering that we couldn't generally evaluate in positive terms. What's the cliche? It's the journey, not the destination. Well, you could adapt that. It's the striving, not the end. I mentioned in the previous episode that I used to enjoy running in the mountains, and that at one point I became rather obsessed with achieving the fastest time up and down Mount LeConte in the Smokies. Well, I never got it. I wound up with only the second fastest time, and even that time didn't last long before some other guy obsessed with the exact same thing beat it. So that's how my efforts wound up. Short. I didn't make it. All of that being true, though, it strikes me as silly to say that all the work that I put in, all the early morning speed sessions before work, all the evening long runs, all those weekends with countless miles and countless hours, well, let's be real, I counted every single one of them, countless miles running through the mountains, all of it was pure suffering that could only have been redeemed by a win, and not only a win, but a win that somehow stood for all eternity. In fact, I was in great shape. I felt great. On some of those runs, I felt like an unstoppable machine just performing its task. I think anybody who's ever taken running seriously has felt exactly that. I wasn't, of course, an unstoppable machine. Actually, I fell a lot, even got beat up pretty bad a few times. And yet, here I am, years later, joyfully retelling the experience, remembering what it was like to feel that great, running through one of the most beautiful natural landscapes on the planet. I loved it. Point is, not all striving is suffering. Often, actually, striving towards a goal that is meaningful to at least oneself can be a persistent form of joy that lasts quite a long while. And when the striving is done, by the way, common and good advice has it that after a brief respite, it's probably best to set another goal and start striving again. Why is that good advice? Because that sort of striving can be a source of joy. That sort of self-overcoming makes one stronger. Because, generally speaking, one can achieve a good life by engaging in a series of cycles of striving towards worthwhile ends. Now, sure, that's not the case with every cycle of striving. Some of it really is tedious or painful or even torturous, but not all of it is. And that fact alone opens the door for a possible reevaluation of the general fact of striving in human life. Perhaps one can come to see striving as meaningful progress, striving that is often joyous, striving that is on the whole worthwhile work necessary to build a good life. Now, you might be able to anticipate the response from Schopenhauer. He will say, look, fine, sometimes striving is joyous. You got me. I should have written that differently. Sometimes it is meaningful and worthwhile to you. But don't forget that however good you feel, and whatever it is you're striving for, it will all come to an end. You will never be completely satisfied because, again, there is no final satisfaction on earth. Well, there is an important insight here. Most of us have felt at one time or another, or probably many times over, that if we could just get X, a degree, a job, a lover, a better physique, whatever it is, if we could just get X, well then, life would be good. As if the achievement of that one thing, whatever it is, would put an end to all of our problems, and we could at last just enjoy life. But then, after much toiling, We often do achieve X, only to find out that the life of one with X consists of new problems, new troubles, and in this way we find ourselves again unsatisfied. And it's true. No one thing is going to solve every problem you have. Humans just have too many and too manifold a set of problems for literally all of them to be solved forever. That is just the nature of being a willing creature in an imperfect and transient material world. The life deniers use this truth, though, to underline their claim that in the end, even if there's joy, even if striving sometimes feels meaningful and worthwhile, at its core, life is inherently unsatisfactory. Better to escape. But again, says who? Even if it is our nature to will, to strive, and even if it is the nature of the world to change, to decay, and even if there is no final satisfaction, who's to say that one cannot reorient himself to that reality, to those facts? One might begin, for example, by questioning the supposed supreme value of a final satisfaction. Is it really so clear that a final satisfaction is what we want? If our lives are characterized by striving and craving, why should that mean that what we want for it is to stop? That we want an end to the striving, an end to the craving? Again, don't get caught up in the logic of striving here. Sure, insofar as we are striving for something, we want it, we don't have it, and that makes striving seem bad. But don't forget, striving can also be joyous. Striving can be a necessary and worthwhile process towards a valuable end. So again, are we sure we want that to stop? Perhaps that sounds appealing to someone in the throes of true suffering, and God knows there's plenty of that in this world. But for many of us, I am equally sure that it sounds like death. So perhaps the very same elements that Schopenhauer and the Eastern ascetics correctly point out as inherent to human life, willing, striving, craving, obstacles, decay, mortality, perhaps these same characteristics of life are actually the conditions for the possibility of value and meaning. Let me try to put it this way. The life deniers, Schopenhauer and the Eastern ascetics, they hold up the ascetic, the one who renounces life completely, as the highest form of life. In other words, if one could choose to be anything, according to them, he ought to choose to be a successful ascetic, one who has attained salvation, freedom from willing. Okay, now consider a hypothetical old man, a happy man. Let's call him the happy man, one who has lived what many of us would recognize as a good life. Sure, like all lives, it contains suffering, in some instances, even profound suffering. There are moments of shame, of inability, of hopelessness, of loneliness, even of tragedy. But let's say this man also created art. Let's say he has also loved and raised a child who turned out well. He appreciates nature. He engaged in deep and difficult ideas and found it all quite moving and enjoyable. Now, of course, that's not the case for everyone, but we're considering the fortunate, happy man. In other words, he has engaged life, strived much, and he has had the good fortune that nothing went too far off the rails. Now, the life denier tells this man that were he a little wiser back in the day, he would have renounced life early on. He could have ceased striving, could have achieved salvation by starving the will until it died within, finally resting in a will-less existence until death. When the man denies that even sounds preferable, even as an old man during death by old age, let's say, what can Schopenhauer say to him? That he is delusional about his own life? That the meaning he felt was illusory? That the love he experienced was futile? That he would have been better off denying the will? Well, what if the happy man says, "Sir, Schopenhauer, the will is precisely the condition that gave me everything I found most beautiful, most meaningful, most valuable in my life. Yes, I was fortunate. Many others are certainly less so. But what can I say? The will has generally been good to me. Desire has been good to me. I have no reason to deny it." Again, what can Schopenhauer say to such a man? There are no universal facts of human experience to which he can point and say, "See, life is something to escape. Get out while you can." And his negative judgment rings hollow to the happy man. In the end, then, the life denier, Schopenhauer, the Eastern ascetics, they must make their case on metaphysical grounds. They must insist that the happy man is delusional, but they must also show us the facts of the world against which the happy man's beliefs are delusional. And those facts must be something beyond just subjective experience. Okay, look, I don't take myself to have provided some knockdown argument with respect to Schopenhauer. Such arguments are rare, if they exist at all in philosophy, but I hope to have made some progress in that direction. I hope to have shown that Schopenhauer or the Eastern ascetics, they can't base their case for the claim that life is suffering and something to escape from on the grounds of subjective experience. They can't say, hey, if you really look at life, you'll see. If you knew that there was no final satisfaction, well, you'd realize just how awful you really have it. They can't do that because, in fact, people can acknowledge the same facts that Schopenhauer points to about life, striving, mortality, the lack of final satisfaction. They can point to those same facts and evaluate them differently. They can even do so in plausible ways. I think the happy man I described above is a perfectly plausible character. And sometimes, especially Schopenhauer does talk like that, as if anyone who really looks at life will admit that he's right, if only he really looks. So here's an example of him doing just that in an essay titled On the Vanity and Suffering of Life. Of course, that's the title. It's in Volume 2 of The World as Will and Representation. He says, if we look attentively at life, see, just look attentively. If we look attentively at life, we see that suffering is its essential nature, and that happiness is only an interval between two pains. Every life is a history of suffering, and if we look at it closely, we see that it is a continuous series of frustration and sorrows. Okay, but again, what about the happy man? If Schopenhauer wants to say that he is delusional, he's going to have to make his case on metaphysical grounds. That is, he's going to have to say, here are the facts of the world, the way the world is, independent of human experience, and the facts of the world show that however the happy man feels about his own life, however he evaluates his own life, he is, in fact, delusional. The happy man thinks he's found real meaning and beauty and value and that life is something to affirm. Well, here are the facts that show he is wrong. Well, turns out that's exactly what Schopenhauer is going to do, or at least that's what he's going to try to do. And that's what we're going to consider in the next episode. Those of you with a background in philosophy or just a background in these traditions, you might have thought of this already. You might have been thinking, hey, what about the metaphysics? Schopenhauer is going to say to the happy man, fine, based on your experience, you say that life is good, something to affirm. Maybe there's nothing I can point to disprove your personal experience and show that I'm right. But here's the thing. Guess what, says Schopenhauer? That world you find so much value in, the ends to which you attach yourself, all of that belongs to what is ultimately an illusion. The world of people and jobs and subjective meaning and value, all of that belongs to the world of perception. And again, that world isn't fundamental reality, says Schopenhauer. What is more, he'll say, wait until you find out what reality actually is. Since you're so stubborn you can't see it in your own life, fundamental reality, he says, actually is just a blind, insatiable will or force, perpetually toppling over itself to the great suffering of all of its manifestations. So fine, you want to affirm life? Well, guess what? What you're affirming, it turns out, is exactly the source of every instance of suffering the world over. Affirming life, says Schopenhauer, that's affirming the blind force responsible for every evil on earth. I'm paraphrasing, by the way. So, asked Schopenhauer of the happy man, what now? Do you still say of life, this is good? Again, Schopenhauer is a cheerful fellow. If that sounds a bit wild to you, and perhaps it should, we'll go much deeper into Schopenhauer's metaphysics in the next episode. We'll see if Schopenhauer can establish that actually, even if some people can achieve what they think is a good life, they have no right to affirm life totally. And in fact, if they only knew what it was, surely they would deny it. Surely they would join Simeon atop his pillar. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed. The entire transcript of this episode is available online. All of it is free. I'll put a link in the show notes. See you next time.